Today we're covering all 11 One Piece characters who have worn the iconic straw hat at some point, starting with characters who've been confirmed, and stay tuned to the very end of the video to hear my theories on the truly symbolic meaning of the straw hat, previous owners of the straw hat that are yet to be revealed, and I've even uncovered the original owner of Luffy's straw hat as it was in our faces this entire time, revealed during the Wano arc. Let's start out with Shanks and Luffy. Red-haired Shanks sailed the seas as the previous owner of the straw hat for at least 14 years. We've even seen certain characters recognize Luffy's hat as Shanks' old hat. For example, Buggy, who damaged the hat when he found this out. We don't know when Shanks first received the straw hat, however, in the Oden flashback when Shanks was around 13 years old, he had already become the owner of the hat. 14 years later, in chapter 1 of One Piece, Shanks entrusts the straw hat to Luffy. It's one of the most important moments in the entire series, as this is what would build and hype up the long-awaited reunion between Luffy and Shanks. Luffy is meant to return him the hat one day, but after all this time, I just can't imagine Luffy without his iconic straw hat. After all, Luffy is the return of Joy Boy, and he is one with the hat, fully embodying it as a symbol throughout the One Piece world, as he is literally referred to as Mugiwara or Mugiwara no Luffy, which translates to Straw Hat Luffy. Luffy's taken on the name of what he calls his treasure. His Jolly Roger has the Straw Hat design, and his crews are called the Straw Hat Pirates. So it's possible that Shanks and Luffy will fight when they finally meet again, and Shanks will tell Luffy to keep the hat, because at this point the Straw Hat is synonymous with him. And while Luffy made the Straw Hat as iconic as it is now, I will admit that Shanks does look cool as hell with it on. Another reason why Straw Hat might fit Luffy better is because he's awakened the Sun God Nika form. He's Joy Boy, and with the theme of Luffy bringing the dawn to the world, it's possible that if Luffy was to give his head back to Shanks, it could symbolize Luffy finally accepting his role as a legendary warrior Nika, since once he takes off the straw hat, the sunlight can finally shine on him. After all, straw hats in the real world were once worn by farmers in fields for protection from the sun. But by far, the greatest meaning behind the importance of Shanks giving the straw hat to Luffy is that it just shows how confident Shanks was in Luffy. Shanks knew that Luffy had what it took to become a legendary pirate like him one day, and Luffy also realized that giving his hat to Shanks marks how far he has come. Who did Shanks receive the straw hat from in the first place? And that brings us to the Pirate King, Gold D. Roger. In chapter 603, it's revealed that Roger, Shanks' former captain, wore the straw hat when he was younger. We see a mini flashback to the time Rayleigh met Roger, as he says, "This meeting is fate. Let's turn the world upside down together." Rayleigh went on to reminisce and say, "There's no such thing as coincidence in this world. Maybe everything that happens is inevitable. Destiny just goes on." And yet Luffy has become a man even more worthy of that hat than Gold D. Roger. It might not be a bad thing to live a little bit longer. And what I love so much about this reveal and this entire quote is that Rayleigh is explaining the feeling of destiny or fate that is tied to the straw hat. Both Shanks and Rayleigh have both acknowledged the similarities between Luffy and Roger, and is likely one of the reasons why Shanks decided to give Luffy the straw hat in the first place. And still, Rayleigh has faith that Luffy will become a man even greater and someone even more worthy of the straw hat than Roger, so I wouldn't doubt it if the Roger pirates actually found out what the straw hat represents and means to Joy Boy when they found the One Piece. My theory is that the straw hat symbolizes destiny, or more specifically, the ability to change destiny itself. An ability that only a few people with an extremely powerful will and ambition have. We know Rayleigh, Roger, and Oden learned from the true history at Laugh Tale, and this includes the future history as well. So this is why Rayleigh says that he's excited to live a little bit longer, as he knows what the future holds. But Luffy makes it unexpected and exciting for him, as he can witness him change the future completely. So far, with Luffy, Shanks, and Roger as the three confirmed owners of the straw hat, we can see a trend of it being passed down to conquerors, powerful pirates with powerful wills. The inherited will that continues until it reaches Joy Boy. It's also like a sacred crown that these kings wear proudly. And I've always wondered, with Roger's greatest marine rival being Monkey D. Garp, how do you think the hero of the Marines reacted to Luffy the first time he saw him wearing the straw hat? And speaking of Garp, did you know that Monkey D. Garp once wore the iconic straw hat? In an alternate reality known as Romance Dawn, Garp is a legendary pirate and a former owner of the straw hat. You can basically replace him with Shanks here as the inspiration for Luffy's pirate journey. I know it's not canon or part of the mainline story, but it still is cool to think about what if Garp actually was a pirate. Next up, we have a few characters who were not owners of the straw hat but have been shown wearing it. And let's start with Nami. But first, make sure that you subscribe if you have not already. YouTube's been glitching out lately, so try to turn off notifications and then turn them back on and see if that helps. I have a huge Rocks Pirates video coming out soon and a bunch of theories in production, so hit that bell like Luffy and Scott P idea to be notified every time we drop because I promise you're not gonna want to miss any of them. Nami wore Luffy's straw hat in one of One Piece's most goosebump inducing moments. Early on when Luffy met Nami, he referred to the hat as his treasure. Nami knew how much his hat meant to Luffy and how protective he was over it, even getting upset when Buggy ripped it earlier in the series. She even helped Luffy patch it up, and all of this culminates into one moment where Nami, in her lowest, most desperate state, finally asked Luffy for help. And how does Luffy respond? That's right, by placing his treasure on her head. He heads over to deal with the evil Arlong pirates who killed her mother and threatened her hometown. Oh, it's so good, and it still gives me chills down my spine every time I reread this scene. Next up, we have One Piece best girl, Nico Robin herself. And what's interesting about this is that she actually wears the straw hat the very first time that she meets Luffy. In fact, this is Robin's first appearance in the entire series. That's right, this stylish cowboy hat wearing Nico Robin snatches it from Luffy's head and puts it on over her own hat in this very mysterious and tense interaction. Now this is a first impression, but what's even better about this is that many fans have pointed out some goated foreshadowing here to the fact that Nico Robin would eventually become a Straw Hat pirate. Let's not forget about Usopp in Long Ring Long Land. While Luffy was getting ready for his Afro showdown with Foxy, Usopp was the man in his corner, his hype man, and so it was only fitting that while Luffy walked into the ring with his Afro on, Usopp held onto his straw hat for the match. And just like we finally got to see Robin smiling and laughing with the crew during the Davy Bag fights, only to break our hearts shortly after in Water 7, Usopp wearing Luffy's straw hat here was the perfect detail to showcase the bond between Luffy and Usopp's friendship right before the heartbreaking fallout. Who is Sweet Pea? Yeah, honestly, I completely forgot about her too until researching for this video, but this is Sweet Pea, a member of the Amazonian woman tribe, and as wild as it sounds, at one point while Luffy is captured, we see him take back his hat from her, and it's actually pretty funny seeing how small it looks on this giant woman's derpy face. To me, Sweet Pea is a complete menace, a thief stealing a man's treasure and giving a tug to an unconscious Luffy's rubber mushroom, if you know what I mean. During the beginning of the Wano arc, Luffy forms a bond with the future ninja master, Tama. There was even a moment when we see Tama with Luffy and she's wearing his straw hat. It shows that Luffy really cares for her, but what hits even harder about this moment is that Tama is a straw hat weaver selling these hats for pennies on the dollar just to survive the harsh reality of Kaido's Wano. And even more depth behind this when you consider that Tama and her straw hat weaving village taught Ace how to make the giant straw hat for oars. Did you know that after the events of Dressrosa where Luffy freed the nation from Don Quixote del Flamingo's evil rule, there's a moment in the anime where we see the Tontatas wearing tiny straw hat replicas that look just like Luffy's to pay respect to their savior. It's a fun little Easter egg, and man, I just can't help loving One Piece's versions of minions. Now we have to talk about Joy Boy. This is not confirmed, but it's one of those things like Luffy being Joy Boy that we all kinda knew it was just too obvious to not be true. In my opinion, we were just always waiting for this to be revealed at some point. But how can we make a video about the straw hat without mentioning the giant straw hat in Mary Joy's, the one that most fans in the community believe was once Joy Boy's? That's right, the giant straw hat has been kept in a frozen by the mysterious Emu for hundreds of years, and this provides many implications, like the straw hat is an important symbol or recognizable artifact of the Void Century past. And the reason why, to me at least, it's obvious that Joy Boy had this giant straw hat is because we already know that the new Joy Boy is Straw Hat Luffy. He's wearing the straw hat as well, the man notoriously known as Mugiwara, so this only makes sense that the previous Joy Boy made the hat so important in the first place. If it's really a custom to pass down the hat as inherited will, it might have all started as a tradition honoring the old Joy Boy's great legacy and dreams. This also implies that Joy Boy was a giant of some kind, or at least a really big human like Whitebeard. And if Joy Boy had the Nika fruit, he could have been a giant who shrunk down, and that's why his hat looks kind of small for an Elbaffer-Oni giant. Now let's get into real theory and speculation territory. But first, guys, our goal is to go full-time on YouTube, so consider joining our Patreon in the description or leaving a super chat comment with your hottest One Piece takes, as you could be featured in a future video. I'll make sure all the money goes towards the channel so we can get out more quality content on a consistent basis. I believe Oars wore the giant straw hat at Mary Joa, and if you've seen our channel before, you might know that we believe Oars was Joy Boy. I won't go too far into this as we've covered it many times, but even if you don't believe that Oars is Joy Boy, I know I can convince you at the very least that he wore the straw hat. And I'm referring to Oars the First, who would have lived hundreds of years ago since Little Oars Jr. III was the one in Marineford, the third generation of his family. In Thriller Bark, we met Oars, who we believe is Oars Jr. II. We see Luffy is very similar to the Oars family, and Moria uses Luffy's shadow to respark life into the ancient giant who led revolutions and conquered lands around the One Piece world. But why this really matters is because it's the first time that we've seen one of the Oars put on a straw hat. To be more specific, we see Oars put on this giant cement-shaped straw hat, which is also a reference to Luffy's hat. You may say, oh, that was just Luffy's personality bleeding out, but this is actually a very tricky detail hidden by Oda in plain sight using Luffy's shadow as the focus. And this all might have been a coincidence until Marineford, because we see Ace created a giant straw hat in Wano for his good friend Little Oars Jr. III, a descendant of Oars, and once again Little Oars Jr. and Luffy are both paralleled in this arc as they are leading the charge with the Whitebeard pirates following with a one-track mind to save Ace. They're both extremely reckless and both receive heavy injuries, sacrificing everything on the line. Plus, Little Oars Jr. III was so grateful and thankful for his straw hat, a random flashback to be placed in the middle of a chaotic Marineford war. It's almost like he was as protective and grateful for his straw hat in a similar way to Luffy calling his straw hat his treasure. But you let me know in the comments, do you believe the original Oars member of this giant family wore a straw hat? Maybe the entire clan wore straw hats in the distant past during the Void Century. And subscribe for more Oars' Joy Boy videos in the future, because trust me, there's a bunch of evidence that we got coming out soon. I asked you guys who you believe was the previous owner of the straw hat before Roger. Where did he get his straw hat from in the first place? And here's what you guys came up with. Many of you seem to agree that it's a Will of D like fate situation, something to do with Joy Boy's will being passed on for centuries. Nakota says, pretty sure he found it in a chest at the top of the mountain on Gaimon's island, and that's why it was empty. And I gotta admit, that'd be pretty funny since Luffy refers to it as his treasure. Arun Krishna 18 says, would love if it's something like a Behelit, and Roger just got it from somewhere instead of someone giving it to him. If you've ever read Berserk, you have an idea of how this could play out, and I think it actually could be true, similar to how Luffy and his fruit might have chosen each other in some supernatural way. Now here's my best, most insane theory that I know you've never heard. I believe that at one point in time, Shomotsuki Ryuma may have been the original owner of the straw hat. Before you click off, I know it sounds crazy, but just hear me out. But before we get into the theory, if you liked anything I said so far, make sure you leave a like. Let's shoot for 2,000 likes and I'll continue to make more videos just like this. When I say the original owner of the straw hat, I mean specifically Luffy's straw hat, not the one that's frozen in Marijoa. You see, we can assume that the giant straw hat in Marijoa has been there for hundreds of years, most likely ever since the end of the Void Century, and it's way too huge for most people anyways. But this means that someone had to carry on the legacy of Joy Boy after he died. Someone who was either his friend or someone that looked up to him as a kid, and who better than Ryuma? You see, many people would say, how can this be? I thought Ryuma was alive only 400 years ago. Yeah, well, that's not exactly entirely true, because the truth is that nowhere in the story has it ever been explicitly stated that Ryuma lived 400 years ago. When Oda refers to when Ryuma lived, it's always extremely vague. For example, he says centuries ago or in the distant past, never an exact time. And you know as well as I do that these vague ancient times in One Piece are almost always referring to the Void Century. This 400-year number actually came from a magazine, which is debatable if this is even canon, but since the Land of Gold may have been tied to Joy Boy's treasure in Ancient Kingdom, and knowing Wano Kuni's geography, the gold might be still deep underground the country's layers of rainwater, and so this means that ancient Wano, where all the gold is where Ryuma once lived. Also, if Ryuma did live 400 years ago, why would Oda not have just told us when Onimato told us about Ryuma, or in Thriller Bark, or when they compared Joy Boy to Ryuma at the end of Wano? Oda's had plenty of chances to reveal this in the story if he did want to. We know Wano is important to Joy Boy in the One Piece, as Oden and Toki knew Joy Boy would arrive in Wano 20 years in the future. And what I think so many people overlook is that Big Mom went out saying the One Piece is here in Wano as she got defeated by Long Kid. And even more proof that Oden and Toki knew that Joy Boy would return is the fact that Joy Boy is not a title, but instead a legend, a figure prophesized to return and liberate. And the fact that Wano's people know of Joy Boy and Nika proves that Joy Boy is so important to Wano's history. This is important because Ryuma was known for fighting against celestial dragons and pirates as well. And really, the entire land of Wano has essentially inherited Ryuma's will, specifically the samurai. So it's possible that Amigasa Village was created to pay respect to him and Joy Boy wearing the straw hats. And so I think it would be perfect that if Luffy's straw hat was actually created in Amigasa Village in Wano, Wano so long ago. In the Wano anime, Zoro wore a samurai-style straw hat, and the scabbards wore the same straw hats when meeting up for the Onigashima raid. Many people compare Zoro to Ryuma, but what's less talked about is how Ryuma is also very similar to Luffy. Ryuma was essentially Luffy and Zoro combined into one character, but Oda likely just ended up splitting the character into two, into both Luffy and Zoro once he started One Piece. But because the person to directly inherit Joy Boy's will has to be a very important character, as this is one of the most important themes in One Piece, who better than Ryuma? Also, if you know me, I believe Ryuma and Zoro both have the will of Deed, and if you think this sounds interesting, watch this video and I can guarantee you'll be convinced.